We are so pleased today to have with us Phoebe Liebling. She is a nutritional therapist and a wellness entrepreneur. A lot of you will know her. I know we've got a lot of followers from South Africa, and we are so happy to have you today. I'm going to hand over to you just to give us a brief introduction.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Yes, so I have been a practicing nutritional therapist for a very long time now, and my career has kind of spanned lots of different areas. I started off in oncology, I then moved more sort of specifically into inflammatory bowel disease and complex digestive issues, and then over the evolution of my career, what I have kind of come to be known for is this understanding and education about the fact that there's nothing in our health that occurs in isolation. So whether you are talking about something to do with your immune system, whether you're talking about something to do with hormones, whether you're talking about something to do with the gut, they're all going to be linked somewhere. And the main thing that tends to drive a lot of health concerns now is the fact that our way of modern living is disruptive for our nervous system. And if our nervous system is disrupted, that is then going to mean that our body adjusts all of the other functions in our body because it feels like it's on high alert. And what I try and do is, rather than suggest that there's any one way to do things with health and nutrition, is to teach people how to understand what suits them, because our habits and our needs will adapt depending on the environment that we're in. So even just the switch from summer to winter will completely change what goes on with our hormones, what we need to be eating, what we want to be doing, and it's that flexibility. And then I guess the more entrepreneurial side is that I am forever looking for ways to make access to what I do easier for everyone. So that's why I've been on social media for, again, quite a long time, but my key thing with social media, again, is reinforcing this idea or providing that why, because a lot of the time what we get is direction, but we don't get the understanding. And the huge point of confusion people then find is that they get told that this thing is going to solve their problem. But again, it's done in isolation and it's done without the explanation. So people will then adopt something, ignore the fact that it doesn't seem to suit them, but because they've been told that it will be the solution and they don't know why, they will then think that it's sort of like the doctor told me to, and so they'll keep blindly following it even if it's not it's not fulfilling the promise that was suggested at the beginning. So that's just a little bit about me.
Absolutely, but it's so true actually. Okay. The next question is, please explain to us, I saw a very interesting post about water retention, and I wanted you to explain to us how that works in relation to hormones, cellulite. How are they all linked?
So there are a few different layers, but the way that I would always remember, because again, it's going to be different for each person, but you've got what I call the 6 S's of water retention. So they are sodium, stress, structure, stagnation, blood sugar, and sex hormones. And all of those things will talk to each other, but they will not all be present for every person who is suffering with water retention and or cellulite. But what you would want to do is, if I just explain those, is you can then identify what bits you think are going to be the ones that are problematic for you, and then you can adjust based on those. So from a basic functional perspective, our water balance is controlled mainly by about 3 things. So it's going to be your electrolytes, which are going to tell your body how to use fluid and basically where to put it. And that's mainly through, we call them antagonistic pairs, which is that you've got sodium and potassium, magnesium and chloride. They're your kind of fundamental electrolytes that are going to be involved. So sodium and potassium work against each other. If they are in balance, you then get good movement of fluid because it will go from one way to the other and they kind of control each other's impact. Now, if potassium falls or sodium rises, you get a switch because sodium draws water with it, whereas potassium would balance that out. So higher sodium will encourage water retention. That is then compounded by a balance between what we call capillary filtration and lymphatic drainage. So lymphatic drainage gets water out of the tissues. Capillary filtration means that more water leaks into your tissues. So again, if your filtration is higher than your drainage, you'll find that water pools, and that's when we get what we call edema, but that can also just show up as like swelling or puffiness or feeling a bit bloated. And then the final thing, which is more of the fundamental, is your kidneys. So your kidneys have two hormones, which are aldosterone and ADH, and they adjust basically how much water goes out in your urine, either by how much your kidneys are filtering, but also again that can adjust your sodium retention. So they're your kind of like underlying basic things that are going to be happening on a day-to-day basis that your body is doing on its own. And obviously we can have impacts on things like our lymph drainage and our sodium intake and our electrolyte usage that will help if that's something that's problematic. But if we then look at how those are impacted by things like hormones, estrogen means you retain sodium, and then progesterone is a natural diuretic. So again, everything always has a balancing pair within the body. But if you've got, say, high estrogen and low progesterone, which some women can find, especially if they've got issues with their gut or they're not detoxifying properly or whatever is going on, they're not kind of like living in sync with their cycle. Estrogen's quite robust, progesterone is quite delicate. So if you're a little bit more stressed, your estrogen levels will stay pretty fine, but your progesterone levels can be slightly compromised. So then in that what we call PMS week, your late luteal phase just before your period, if your estrogen levels remain a little bit higher, you will hold on to more sodium, you will hold on to more water, and that water will also sit in your tissues, and you don't have the progesterone to balance that out, which would naturally flush it more through your kidneys. So a lot of women can feel that bloated puffiness just before their period, and that's adjusting their estrogen to progesterone ratio to support that, but also then thinking, am I still doing intense exercise? Because stress is going to compound that problem. Am I having quite a lot of salty food? Am I maybe a little bit dehydrated? Am I not using electrolytes? Could I do a bit more lymph drainage? Could I have an Epsom salt bath? Those kind of things will all be useful in terms of managing the symptom, whilst you can then look at your hormones in the next cycle, because if you're already in that place, you can't adjust the hormones then. You have to adjust for the next cycle, the one after. So that's the kind of like primary reproductive hormones. But then if we look at the others, so the stress and blood sugar side, you've got other hormones, cortisol and insulin. So again, cortisol is going to adjust sodium retention, which is why often people, there was a whole thing on social media that I kind of try and step away from these crazes, but then also explain them. So this whole thing of like, look at my face, I've got cortisol face, and then I decreased my inflammation and suddenly I was really skinny. Cortisol face that people were talking about, if it's puffy, that can because you're not draining effectively, but cortisol will increase sodium retention again. So that's the layer that I was saying about stress and then the reproductive hormones as well. And cortisol also increases insulin levels, because if you've got cortisol present, your body feels it's stressed. That then means you have to produce 3 times the amount of insulin to balance your blood sugar than if it wasn't there. Wow. So short-term stress, this is again the thing that people get confused about. Short-term bursts of stress, performance enhancer, your body recovers, ideal. You turn on, you turn off, perfect. If you have chronic ongoing stress from not recovering enough between exercise, doing too intense exercise and not thinking about how you are sleeping, if you're under fueling, if you're drinking loads of caffeine, if you're having lots of alcohol because that disrupts your sleep, those kind of things then lead to chronically disrupted cortisol, which will then have that ongoing impact. And you'll also notice other symptoms, like you might get or feel a bit more bloated or feel mentally fatigued or overwhelmed or anxious, because your body again is perceiving that there's a monster somewhere because it doesn't know what that cortisol response is from. And so again, also cortisol and insulin, everything's keeping you holding on to sodium, which is not going to be helpful. The last thing is also that if you've got high stress and stuff going on with your reproductive hormones, we have your different axes when we talk about hormones. So it's usually HP, so hypothalamus and then pituitary, 2 glands, and then you've got different ones that come off. So you've got your adrenal axis, which is going to go to cortisol and adrenaline, your thyroid axis, and then you've got your like a gonadotrophic one, so that's your ovaries or your testes, and so they're going to be your reproductive hormones. If these adrenal and reproductive ones are being yanked, you can also find that then impacts your thyroid function. And if you've got issues with thyroid, so low thyroid function, it slows down lymph drainage and also increases stuff that's going on in your tissue, so that will increase puffiness, but also be more likely to trigger things like cellulite. which brings us firmly on cellulite, which is not simply fat. People always, and again, I enjoy the fact that social media is a place for conversation, and I always think that if somebody like myself is suggesting anything, we should be able to stand up to challenge. So I love it when people come to me and say, explain yourself. And I go, of course, there is absolutely nothing that I would suggest or talk about that was not clinically evident. And so if you want to challenge me, I am absolutely here with those review articles, with the full explanation, ask me the question. But I was talking about this and somebody then just basically got very upset because something must have been going on in their life and they decided to diffuse that energy into the world. Talking about body fat percentage and saying, well, you don't have enough body fat to have cellulite. Now that is nothing really to do with cellulite because it's actually altered connective tissue. So the reason that women are more likely to have cellulite is our collagen structure is going to be, it's like lines, it's linear, whereas men's is a crisscross pattern. So reduction in collagen production with age, anything to do with inflammation, changes in hormone levels, that will basically allow fluid to push through the collagen structure, and that's what gives the dimpling. So, and that's also then going to be compounded by things like if you've got poor microcirculation or you don't have good muscle structure, because again, for things like lymph, your blood circulation has your heart as a pump, so that will keep circulating. Lymph doesn't have a pump. The way that you circulate lymph is by contracting your muscle tissue. So if, for example, you're doing lots of walking or you're doing lots of running and you've got lots of cellulite on the back of your legs, it's because you're not actually building or activating muscles at that stage, which is why I get a lot of women to, and again, if we talk about the anatomy of a woman, the way that we would say do a squat is very different from a man because of the Q angle of our hips. So actually we don't use the back of our legs as a man would. We can't physically get into that position. So which is why I talk about things like using a vibrating plate, because you can use it on a low setting for lymph drainage, but then if you're actually on a high setting, you are then resisting that action of the plate. That's going to send those vibrations up, which activates all that muscle tissue and will help with the restructuring of the collagen matrix and that kind of thing. So that was a very long explanation, but there are lots of different things that will compound it. But fundamentally, you're looking at things like your sodium retention and then thinking about your collagen structure. So the best thing, if you've got cellulite on the back of your legs and you really find it uncomfortable, think about doing things like hamstring curls, working on that kind of structure, using a vibrating plate, and not focusing on the idea that it's fat related, because it absolutely isn't.
But it all makes sense. It makes actual sense once you break it all down. Yeah. Okay. Amazing. So you spoke about sleep, and I think as women get older, we kind of, well, I certainly have. I've started struggling really badly with my sleep. So it affects so many areas of health. What are some of your tricks for getting a full 8 hours? What are some good sleep hygiene tips that you can give us maybe?
So the one thing I would say is 8 hours of sleep is like 10,000 steps per day. It's a completely nominal, non-useful marker for sleep quality. So I sleep between 6.5 to 7.5 hours per night, but I use an Oura ring, and I can tell you that my HRV, which is my heart rate variability, which shows my body's resilience and my recovery, is optimal, because it's about the efficiency of your sleep cycle, not about the length of your sleep cycle. So a lot of people who you talk to who sleep 8 or 9 hours say, I have to get 8 or 9 hours sleep because otherwise I feel awful. And I go, but do you actually feel good after you have 8 or 9 hours sleep? And they go, nah. I'm like, so there's a difference between waking up feeling vital from a very efficient sleep cycle as opposed to wake up feeling, I've looked at the clock, I've had 9 hours, I must be okay, I'm going to get on with my day. So there are a couple of things to be aware of when it comes to why you might sleep badly. So the two key things are blood sugar and overstimulation. So our blood sugar is a 24-hour cycle. People will talk about blood sugar regulation during the day, but you need energy to stay asleep. And if you've had dysregulated blood sugar during the day, that will then be mirrored when you are asleep. And the main thing that would normally happen is somebody who sleeps well will finish eating, their insulin levels will drop between an hour to 2 hours later, and then they will use stored energy, either from fat or from glycogen, which is stored carbohydrates in the muscle and liver cells, and that will keep them energized whilst they are asleep, because your body is doing all of its work when it doesn't have to be upstanding, basically. So people who have lots of broken sleep, or feel like they sleep very lightly, or wake up, or feel like they need to go to the toilet a lot, or that kind of thing, it's usually because their blood sugar's done this over the course of the day. Then they fall asleep, their insulin levels don't fall sufficiently for them to access their stores, and what their body is then trying to do is just sometimes producing little bits of adrenaline, which is when people will wake up and go and feel very awake, but that's actually to liberate more of that stored energy to be able to keep them asleep. So thinking about what you're eating and what you're drinking during the day, when you wake up in the morning, especially during the winter, think about what your habits are then. If you have a coffee straight away, your cortisol rhythm will naturally then be on high alert. So try and have something like water with some electrolytes, maybe something more like a cacao style drink with a bit of protein in it. Or if you feel like you are somebody who has to really get up and go and is then like running around a lot, try and have something small. It can literally be like a cracker. It could be 2 almonds, but tell your body that it's secure and it has ample fuel to support itself. It will then know that it can use up its stores later in the day, and then try and think about the idea of having a savoury breakfast and then see how long your meals sustain you for. It's not about denying hunger, but what a lot of people get into the habit of doing is having a smaller meal and then snacking a couple of hours later. Now that means that your insulin level never properly drops, and so then you go into that cycle. So we're looking about this kind of like eat, and then 3.5 hours to 4 hours later, you then eat again, and kind of doing that over the day. That will stabilize your blood sugar, and try and give yourself about 2 hours before you go to bed when you haven't eaten anything. Now, if you eat very early and then do find that you get hungry, protein and fat as opposed to carbohydrate before you go to sleep will mean that you don't get an insulin response, which will then sustain you but also allow you to fall asleep better. Technology interaction, again, what are you saying to your brain first thing and last thing at night? Because our phones and everything like that, if you're doing that first thing that you get up in the morning and the last thing before you go to bed at night, you're going to be incredibly wakeful. And also those habits in your bedroom. Like if your bed is somewhere where you neurologically create an association with being calm and restful, you will naturally feel more calm and restful and fall asleep better. But if you are somebody who brings your laptop into bed to answer your emails or watches the news, asleep watching Netflix, they're all very active brain tasks, and your brain doesn't have the context of what they are. It's just being told to be on. So I tend to be quite specific about curating this environment. It's got to be cold. It's got to be about 16 to 18 degrees centigrade because your body temperature has to drop. So I think cold room, cozy blanket. So you want the surrounding air temperature to be cool, but you can obviously have a warm duvet on you. You don't want to have a hot shower or hot bath any closer to bed than an hour. So if you have one about an hour before, you then get a subsequent body temperature drop, which will help you fall asleep. Whereas if you have a hot shower and jump into bed, again, your body is very metabolically active, and you're not going to get that until about an hour later, which can mean you're tossing and turning for a while. And again, you've then associated bed with being wakeful. Keep the window open, or at least have some kind of air circulation, because oxygen concentration will dictate how well and sort of deep you sleep. And really try to think about, again, this idea of like, I like things like smells. Smells are incredibly neurologically toning. So I have things like a lavender pillow spray, which I spray anywhere else. Lavender is only going to be in the bedroom, whereas if I have other things in the house, they're going to be more like spicy. They're going to be like orangey or citrusy, or I don't know. I've got like counter sprays that are made out of essential oil. Yeah, they're gonna have like a wakeful energy to them. And also the other light, candles and dim light from about an hour or so before bed. Make it cozy. And if you do get into bed and you feel like you can't wind down, get out. Go and sit in a chair, read a book, or do something analog, like no screen related. Do a couple of cycles of breathing when you breathe in and then exhale for longer to calm your body down. When you feel like you're in a restful state, then get into bed. And it's just about, again, when people have had issues with sleep, you can start to have almost like a slightly trauma response idea of the fact that you're going to and not be able to go to sleep. So what you don't want to do is try and push through that. It's just about taking yourself away, giving yourself a moment to realize that you're actually fine, and then getting back in. And again, if you are somebody who wakes up in the night, if you've tried all those other bits, try putting something heavy on your chest. Like, not really heavy, but if you've got something just like, you know, those wheat bags that you can warm up that are like...
Yes, exactly.
It just has to be a little bit of pressure, but we have all of these sensors all over our body, and it's kind of like a baby being swaddled that calms you down. So if you pop something on your chest and then try and breathe, you've also got resistance against the breathing, which if you open up your chest and open up your diaphragm will calm you down. So those things won't stop immediately if you've got this burst of adrenaline that's waking you up. But again, if you can fire break and think, actually, there was no reason for me to wake up at that point, cumulatively over a few days, you'll then find that you actually start to sleep longer and longer. So it's retraining the environment, but then also retraining your system, which is something that they work really nicely together.
Absolutely. That's such good advice. Definitely going to try those. Okay, perfect. Let's chat about electrolytes. I know in South Africa at the moment, there's a huge thing about try this electrolyte, try this one, try this one. But how do you know if they've been sweetened? How do you know which ones are good quality and which ones are not? What are some tips regarding choosing a good electrolyte?
So there's a kind of a definition when it comes to what you're looking at them for. So a daily electrolyte doesn't need to have any flavour whatsoever. And ideally it would be a liquid. So what you would then just look at is that you would have ionic minerals, which basically means minerals with an electrical charge. And it would just be magnesium, sodium and chloride. That's it. And you want to have them in relatively, they're not going to be equal quantities, but you're not going to have like 1,000 milligrams of sodium per serve, because that's not what you want. When you start to go to the ones that are, say, sachet based, that have a sweet flavour and have 1,000 milligrams of sodium, that's a rehydration product. And the problem that we have is that electrolytes are now becoming more mainstream, because what people will realise is, for example, you use sodium to make adrenaline. Or stressed, we need a little bit more sodium. And so actually things like feeling a bit dehydrated or thirsty, even if you're drinking a lot, you add an electrolyte and it helps with your body to use those things effectively. That's an electrolyte. So literally pure liquid, no flavour whatsoever, and like about 250 milligrams of sodium, similar amounts of magnesium, that kind of thing. That's what you're looking for, and it should have nothing else in it. When we then look at the other forms, like I say, what you're getting is a rehydration product. So when they have a sweet flavour, they were originally made for people like endurance runners or cyclists, and you need, when you have a high amount of sodium because of fluid loss, you need sugar to activate the transporter in the gut that allows for rapid sodium uptake. But what they've then done is said, well, people know about blood sugar regulation now, and we want to now be able to sell our product out of the niche market of endurance athlete. So what we'll do is we'll swap the sugar for a sweetener, because then there's no blood sugar response, because people don't want to buy something that's got sugar in it, but they wanted a taste of something. But what you've then got is a product that's incredibly high in sodium, which will cause fluid retention, and you don't need that amount unless you've lost loads of fluid. But you've also lost its efficacy as a rapid rehydration product, because it's not going to activate that transporter in the gut. And what people will find as well is a lot of the most of the natural sweeteners, they all end in ol. So mannitol, xylitol, stevia. That means sugar alcohol. And sugar alcohols ferment really badly in the gut. So a lot of people who then say that they're getting more IBS or bloating, it's actually because they're consuming too much sodium and those sugar alcohols. So if you are an endurance athlete and you get an unflavoured high sodium electrolyte, or you're on a keto diet, so a keto diet increases sodium losses quite rapidly. So they would then need a high sodium product as their daily electrolyte. They're the only ones. If you are completely, basically 0% carbs, then you would need that. But if you're an endurance athlete, you want high sodium with sugar. So an unflavoured electrolyte with something like honey or coconut water or juice in water, and you would have that around when you have fluid. Absolutely fine. Or if, say, you're somewhere it's incredibly hot, and you would have one of those per day, and then you use a regular electrolyte in the rest of your water. Anything that is marketed as a daily electrolyte that has a sweet flavour but no sugar and high sodium goes in the bin.
Okay.
It's not going to work as an electrolyte. It's going to actually disrupt your fluid balance, and it's not going
That
to
sounds terrible.
It's about marketing. Go onto these websites, and I mean, there are lots of different ones, but like, for example, LMNT, which have got huge backing from very big names. If you go onto their website, it says it in the FAQs, but they don't talk about it because then they wouldn't be able to sell it to everyone.
It's shocking.
Yeah.
Wow, that is shocking. Okay, let's chat about, we'll continue with gut health. What should we include in our diets to assist with good health, and what can we do to maintain it as well?
So the thing about gut health is it's actually not as complicated as everybody thinks. And if the difficulty is, a lot of the advice around gut healthy foods are marketed for the mainstream, which is actually usually not the people who see it. So if you are interested in wellness, you're probably eating well for your gut. But again, the gut healthy products, so the ones that are like granola that's enhanced with prebiotics. Granola in essence, without added prebiotics, is a prebiotic. So prebiotics are what feed your probiotic bacteria, and that's going to be all of your plant foods. So nuts, seeds, whole grains, fruits and vegetables, and things like olive oil. And then you do also have some bacteria that are going to ferment things like proteins, which is great. But if you then start adding in extra prebiotic fibre, that's for the people who don't eat 5 servings of fruit and vegetables in a week, which is a lot of people. But they're marketed, again, to the people who are probably already having a relatively diverse diet. And so it overcorrects, and then again, you get bloated, you get gassy. I call it the curse of the superfood salad, which is the idea that like all of these people would go into those salad bars and they'd have something that was like quinoa and brown rice and beans and kale and 15 other vegetables and then nuts and seeds, and then they'd eat it and then feel like they'd eaten a brick. The idea that you want to aim for, that's just way too much stuff. You want 30 plant foods over the course of a week. So that's actually not that much. And what you want to do is you want to vary that over the course of a year. So if you vaguely eat in season, you're going to get a natural shift, also in keeping with the environment outside as to what's going to be available. And the other key thing is that when we talk about fibre, people always get it wrong, and they think like broccoli and kale and cauliflower are like gold standard. Those are very high insoluble fibre. So insoluble fibre in the gut is kind of like a brush. It goes through, it's not actually feeding things, it provides bulk to the stool and it tickles your intestinal muscles. But what we actually want more of is the soluble fibre, which forms like a sponge. It goes like a gel-like substance. So that's what actually draws water into the bowel, keeps all of your detoxification nice. It makes it easy to go to the toilet. So that's all of your cooked root vegetables, things like white rice, chia seeds, like the soft stuff, onions, aubergines, courgettes. They are probably more important, and people kind of underdo those. So I would tend to go for like 60% of the softer stuff, like the sticky stuff, and then 40% of the harsher, brushier stuff. And think about the meal in a whole. So if you've got, say, broccoli, lentils, and salmon, that's very high in soluble fibre, and it's going to make you feel really full for quite a long period of time, but it's not going to make you feel very energetic. You've got to work quite hard to get to the nutrition inside that. So what I would say is, if you're having a meal, one insoluble fibre source, and then look at the others. Again, when it comes to things like probiotic rich foods, use them as a garnish. Your fermented vegetables, your cooked miso. I'm a bit kombucha, it's very high in yeast, and it's also not got the element of the prebiotic bit with it. So I don't mind it, but I would consider it kind of like having a soda. So I would put it alongside as like a treat. I wouldn't be drinking it every day for your gut health. But something like having a bit of sauerkraut, you've got the prebiotic cabbage, and then you've got the probiotic element of the fermentation. But you need like 1 to 2 tablespoons as a serving, and you don't need to be doing that every day, because again, otherwise you overcompensate and you tend to feel a little bit gassy. So yeah, it's one of those areas where to be gut healthy, just go for a varied diet, and no one thing is better for your gut health than another. If you kind of focus on thinking, I'm just going to have broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts and brown rice every week, you're actually going to be less well off in terms of your gut health, as opposed to somebody who eats a varying array of like sweet potato, tomato, aubergines, white rice, that kind of thing, because it's going to be more diverse. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I really did not know that about I was making that exact mistake with the broccoli and the everything. So that's such a good point. Okay, perfect. So I saw a really interesting post about gut health, IBS, and a secret sauce. And I was so intrigued by this. Please, can you tell everyone about this?
So it's one of those moments that for me, when I share food ideas, there's layers to understanding what they're actually doing. So when we talk about IBS, it's an umbrella term for a collection of symptoms. No one person's IBS is going to be the same as another's. It's basically just people that experience intermittent bloating, gas, potentially constipation or diarrhea, feeling uncomfortable when they eat certain foods in certain situations, and 90% of IBS is anxiety related, so nervous system related. But the thing about that is that when you are more hypersensitive, because your nervous system is activated, your digestive system turns off a bit. So the actual manifestation of the IBS symptoms is because your stomach acid and your digestive enzymes don't get produced as effectively because your digestion is distracted. That then means that food isn't broken down effectively in the stomach. It travels into the intestines in larger pieces where it ferments and adjusts things like bowel motility, causing bloating, gas, constipation and diarrhea. So the secret sauce recipe that I shared, the idea is that it's got it's got apple cider vinegar and it's got herbs in it, and it's got a sort of like a light citrusy but also quite naturally bitter flavour to it. So the idea is that first of all, it provides a moment where as you're serving your meal, you create something and you then adorn it with something that's going to trigger your brain to be aware of the fact that you're eating. So for somebody who's really struggling, I actually get them to have a spoonful of it before they start their food, because it's also going to then give that stomach acid support, which is going to be from things like the apple cider vinegar and the herbs. So you actually give the body the resources it needs to help break down your food more effectively, but you've also broken the distraction that is actually then causing somebody to have those problems. So I have stood up quite a few times and say that I think that actually a doctor giving somebody a diagnosis of IBS is irresponsible, because it then suggests that they are just going to have to cope with those symptoms ongoing, and in actual fact that's completely incorrect. The problem being that if you go to a doctor, they are an acute care physician. So once they've excluded all of the potential actual issues that could cause gut dysfunction, they don't have anything else to offer you. Whereas what we're actually saying is it's not an acute digestive issue, it's a more complex intertwining of your emotional well-being, sense of overstimulation, and then what's physiologically happening as a result of it. So it's more about, what I would say to somebody in that situation is make the sauce, but when you sit down to eat, my other key trick is to do what I call the 3-chew trick. So you put the first spoon, always sit down, you're never rushing. You take a deep breath in through your nose and breathe out through your mouth, and then you put your first mouthful of food in. And as you're chewing, you breathe in through your nose and you see where your breath goes. Because if it only goes to here, that means your diaphragm is currently contracted and that food is then not adequately digested. So what you do is you pop your fork down and you keep chewing whilst you keep trying to breathe in and out through your nose until you can feel that your diaphragm relaxes. And for a lot of people, it's about building, again, this cumulative awareness of how certain situations will trigger them. Because again, IBS is patternless usually. Somebody will eat the same meal in one setting and feel absolutely fine, and then eat it in another setting and have symptoms. It's not the food, it's the machine that's the problem. So having those little moments when you twig into what your body's actually saying to you will then mean that you can overcome those problems. And what a lot of people will find is, say, they'll come back from a certain work day and they won't have had any time to wind down, and then they'll eat dinner, think, oh my god, it's late, I should probably eat now, eat with distraction and feel really bloated. But conversely, or it could be that they find being in certain situations with certain people quite stressful. Say there's like a dispute going on at the table, and they will then find that that triggers them, whereas if they can eat quietly, they will then find that they're not symptomatic. So again, it's about learning to interact with the feedback that your body is giving you and creating little tools to then help you do that. But the sauces are delicious, so you should just make them anyway, but they are also going to be fantastic as rather than taking a digestive enzyme, it's a way of
Yes.
your food and encouraging people, again, when you've got something like IBS, people become fearful of food. They start to think that everything, so their enjoyment of food, it becomes a battlefield, and they start actually not interacting with food in a positive way. So what I always try and do is find ways to show them that food can still be diverse and still be delicious whilst being therapeutically effective, which again, if you can start to break down the anxiety about the fact that you might get symptoms, that helps to rein everything back in and again, calm you down.
Absolutely. Okay, amazing. That source recipe is on your Instagram.
Yeah.
Just in case anyone wants to find that. Okay, so let's chat about fiber. We've touched on that a few times now. So you said, what are some fiber mistakes besides the broccoli? How can we incorporate it as well? Because I think sometimes it's so difficult if someone says you need to incorporate fiber, but you don't really know how much per day, or is it per meal? It's a bit overwhelming.
So the actual kind of like standard guidelines are a woman needs between like 30 to 35 grams of fiber per day, and a man will need about 35 to 40 grams per day. So that's the kind of like standard amount that you would need. What I tend to suggest is, if you are thinking of like, get basically most bang for your buck and avoid the trick of volume eating. So the thing about fibre is it's going to slow down the release of energy from other foods, and it's going to give you a sense of fullness because it's going to digest slowly. But we're talking about cooked things. And what a lot of people will do is they will go for a lot of raw. So they'll do lots of salads. So like salad veg, like lettuce and tomatoes and cucumber and celery. Lots of crunch, lots of neurological feedback. If people are very overstimulated, they like the idea of eating something really big and crunching through it. But that's actually going to break down and ferment very quickly because it's mainly water. And so it's stretched your stomach, but then it's dissipated quite fast. So that's not great, because if you pair that with proteins, they will then digest a lot more slowly. And so you kind of get a weird slurry where you've got slowly digesting proteins in a kind of like watery soup mix. That's not going to be lovely in terms of actually then getting good output from that, because also when that moves into the gut, you haven't got this idea of soluble fibre, which is going to absorb water to then help you go to the toilet. So again, this can cause lots of things like gas or intermittent bowel movements. Cooked vegetables, just even lightly steamed. So like if I was going to do a meal, I would think about the idea of about 2 fistfuls of fibre per meal. But then if you are having something like, well, your carbohydrates also contain fibre. So if you're having beans or pulses, a jacket potato, pasta, noodles, any kind of grain, they are also going to be a fibre source too. So I'm kind of thinking about like 2 fist-sized servings of something like a bit of steamed greens with some roasted squash and some roasted onions. And then I might have something like some sweet potato, and then have your protein. And then if you want to garnish with a bit of rocket, or you like a few fresh tomatoes, think again about the percentage, like 10% raw per meal, and then do the rest like a little bit more cooked. But obviously if it's warm outside and you're thinking, I don't want to eat loads of cooked vegetables, just use like chard, or you could use something like kale or like a spring cabbage. Steam it lightly, chuck it with some lemon, maybe a bit of apple cider vinegar, a bit of olive oil, and keep it in the fridge. And then when you come to then build a salad, use things like grilled courgette and your roasted aubergine and some steamed green beans and a lovely dressing. So it still feels like a salad if that's what you're fancying eating, but the actual representation of the fibre is going to be much more supportive in terms of how you feel afterwards and how your body actually uses it as a result. Because people again will look at the abundance and volume of a meal and correlate that to nutrient density, which is absolutely not true. So you don't want, like if you eat that huge volume meal, that's going to stretch your stomach. You're going to feel very, very full for a very long period of time and potentially a bit uncomfortable. Whereas actually if you think that like that amount on a plate of that kind of lovely combination of cooked things with the other elements of your meal, that will then also create that proper sugar regulation pattern that I was saying before, where you'll eat, feel comfortably full and satisfied and energetic. Because what a lot of other people will do is huge amounts of fibre, protein, tiny bit of carbs, and then they'll be like, oh, I really want a brownie, I have to have chocolate after every meal. I'm like, well actually that is because you haven't had enough in terms of active energy from the food that you've eaten, so your body then wants quick sweet energy to top you up afterwards, which is not a bad thing if you ever, like if you want dark chocolate after lunch every now and again. But if it's every single meal, that's a bit of body feedback. It's telling you that you want meeting your energetic needs.
Gosh, this is such good information. I'm making so many nutritional mistakes. Wow, this is excellent. Okay, perfect. So the latest data on creatine reveals just how much we need it as women, which is amazing. There's been so much great information on so many different areas that we didn't expect that it helps with. Can we chat a bit about this and how to also pick a good brand? How do you know that this is actually a good one to pick?
So the thing about creatine for women is that we naturally have lower creatine stores than men. So we get far more benefits from a very much smaller amount because our starting baseline is a lot lower, and that's also a critical thing to understand. So because creatine draws water into muscle tissue, what a lot of women will find is if they follow the classic advice of doing I've seen something crazy recently, it's like do 20 grams a day as a loading dose. I'm like, you must feel like a bouncy castle. You'll be so inflated with water. So it's amazing for things like strength and muscle recovery. It's going to allow you to perform, because it's also an oxygenating molecule, it's going to allow you basically to decrease what we call the rate of perceived exertion. So if I was to go and carry 4 huge heavy shopping bags back from the supermarket, my rate of perceived exertion will be relative to my baseline strength and how heavy those shopping bags are and how far I have to walk. Now, if I added creatine into my routine, the idea is that it would decrease how heavy I think those bags are and how long I feel that is, because it's allowing my muscles to work more effectively at a lower baseline for a longer period of time. So you get enhanced performance, which means more consistent progress, but you also get enhanced recovery, which means that you will bounce back and be able to train more consistently. So the other key thing is for women, they can find that because of the adjustment of energy and blood sugar regulation, because of their hormones, that they can struggle with progress because they'll think, I'm now not as strong as I was before, I find it really difficult to recover, and those kind of things. So creatine can be really helpful there. It's also a really useful molecule for the nerve system and for the brain. So again, it's going to enhance the activity there, and it can make you feel like if you get things like brain fog, especially going through things like it's very useful there because it enhances memory function. But again, if you are somebody who's prone to things like overwhelm or anxiety with your hormones, you're actually going to make the nerve system more functionally effective. So you then don't feel overwhelmed as quickly because you feel like you're more able to function at a high level. And then there are other key moments, like creatine is what we call conditionally essential during pregnancy, which basically means that we will not be able to consume enough from our diet. So you do get creatine from animal foods. So if you're vegan, you have to supplement it. You don't get it otherwise. But during pregnancy, because of the requirement for creatine for growing a new baby and also sort of like increasing things like your blood volume, avoiding leg cramping, you will always benefit from having a supplement. The actual amount that you need is dependent on what you want from it and also what you do with it. I would also be thinking about how you structure your dosing. So, for example, if somebody is quite prone to water retention before their period, they don't get creatine during their luteal phase because for whatever reason, it's more from a comfort perspective, from understanding that for somebody who already feels that they can't wear the jeans that they like in that run up to their period, if I then give them something else that's going to potentially cause a bit more water retention, they're going to absolutely hate it. And there's nothing worse than being emotionally uncomfortable in your skin. So I usually tend to say, start off intermittently dosing it. So if you are doing progressive strength training, so you have to be taxing that muscle tissue, you would take a small amount, 1 to 2 grams, to allow your body to adjust. Now, if you are somebody who is looking for a CrossFit high rock style body, or you are heavyweight training and that is the aesthetic you want, go higher, because you will in 30 days put on a significant amount of muscle bulk. But when you first start taking it, you will go up very quickly in terms of your weight on the scales because you will be holding a lot more water. So again, mentally think about it. For you, if you are somebody who is in a place where you weigh yourself regularly and the numerical number on the scales is impactful on your mental well-being, probably take creatine. You will see that adjustment, and then that's something that you will, it's about understanding the emotional nuance, especially working with women, which is something I've curated for a long time. But if I see somebody and they are trying to put muscle on, but they are in that place where they are still struggling with the idea of calorie intake, numbers on the scales, etc., creatine is not appropriate because it's just not going to help in that stance until they can understand that there will be a period where their body's adjusting to it. Then what I would say is like get used to how much exercise you're doing. And if you're only doing very lightweight Pilates, creatine is just going to make you feel bloated. So you need to be doing that kind of like higher taxing muscle stuff. And then looking at your requirements. So if you're a little bit older and you aren't doing the heavy muscle stuff yet, because we all need to be doing it, so you working up to that idea, using that 1 to 2 gram dosage will be incredibly beneficial for your memory function and for other bits of things like your bone health and preserving the muscle mass that you've got. But if you're a bit younger, eating quite a high protein diet and not doing lots of activity in terms of the muscle stuff, you probably don't need it at this stage. And like I say, really toning it to your emotional interaction with how your body will physically shift when you include it. The thing about creatine is it's actually a very widely available product. And so what you just want to look for is a micronized creatine monohydrate. And there are, for certain different situations, beautiful products now that are a much higher price tag, which combine, say, creatine with NMN. And that's more for cognitive function, energy, longevity. I use one and it's a microdose of creatine because I eat a very protein-rich diet, and I find that because I'm very hypermobile, because of the laxity of my collagen, if I use a normal dose of creatine, my legs swell up just because my body cannot control my structural element, the stuff we were talking about at the beginning. It's however much I do, it's always slightly anatomically compromised. So again, for my mental well-being, I use 400 milligrams of creatine, and that's perfect with me, and I combine it with NMN because they then synergistically enhance each other, so I get the same benefits as if I was using 3 grams of creatine, but using a much lower dose because I've used them together. As I was saying, for the baseline, creatine is quite easy to find. It should be a completely pure product in a powder usually. The capsules, they can be effective, but again, if you're trying to adjust your dosage, you'll usually find that they're going to be the standard 5 gram dose, which makes it a little bit more difficult to then think, oh, well, I've got to open the capsule and work out how much I need. So I tend to just go bog standard, good quality powder, and just make sure the only singular ingredient is micronized creatine monohydrate, and you should be absolutely fine.
Perfect. That makes so much sense. Last question, how does movement benefit diet / digestion and overall health for women?
So I love the fact that you've used the word movement rather than exercise, because I think that's actually a very specific clarification point. And the 2 factors that would basically allow somebody to answer this for themselves is, do you need consistency or do you need intensity? So you cannot have both, because you have to allow the body to recover. And hormones for women do not like being over pushed. So if you are somebody who needs to move every day, the intensity of your sessions comes down. Medium weights 3 times a week. And then on the days in between, you could do body weight style yoga or Pilates. And then you could add in 15 to 20 minute walks later in the day. So I'm thinking like somebody exercises maybe in the morning, and they like to have that hour to themselves. Like whether, like for me, I have to do something. So whether if I go to the gym, I walk the dog, or I go to yoga, it's really important for me to have that grounding period of time for myself before my day starts, because my day in essence is looking after other people. So I need to know that I've looked after myself, and I get that by doing my daily movement. Now, if I was thinking about doing very heavy weight training, what I would have to do is I'd have to say, right, I heavy weight train on a Monday, and on Tuesday, I just walk. I can't be doing anything else, because that workout, you're getting the benefits of it and your body is recovering for about 48 hours afterwards. And if you train again before that's happened, you don't allow that muscle synthesis to happen, you become more inflamed, and you are forever fighting the sensation of feeling puffy and distended. So if you are somebody who wants to work hard, or say your schedule means that you can only train 3 times a week, you go all out and then you have a dead day where you just walk. And then you go all out and then you just walk. But if you want a consistent pattern of movement over the course of the week, you don't ever get to that point where you are feeling, where you shouldn't be limping out of the gym, but you should only ever be doing something that feels like it's activating your muscles, and it's about 30 minutes in length. And that's the idea of the link with general health, because if you are emotionally interacting with the body where you feel like you're putting a lot of effort in and you're not then getting the results, that's emotionally depletive. Whereas if you can get into more of a sinuous cycle where you know that you will work hard, feel really good and probably look great after that workout, and then feel a little bit puffy the next day because that's the natural inflammatory response. But what people will then say is, I looked great after that workout, I feel puffy today, I should work out again because then I'll look great. No, look great on the third day, and that will then continue to compound over time, but you've got to allow your body to heal. It's like if I went and jumped down and smashed my ankle, I would expect it to be swollen the next day. But people don't equate weight training to your body doing that exact thing. It's flooding those tissues with histamine and collagen and immune cells and water to heal itself and get stronger. But then if you allow for that, like that sort of tidal rhythm, progressively over time, what you find is that you become leaner and more well-managed. Not well-managed, but you'll feel better in yourself. But it's consistency versus intensity. And again, for things like gut health, if you are overtraining, your digestion will suffer. But if you do gentle movement, and I was talking to a friend the other day, and she's an incredible Pilates teacher, has a wonderful online platform, but she always laughs because she says, what people don't realise is Pilates, they think is just good for like body shape and that kind of stuff, but actually it makes you go to the loo, which is true. Because if you do really controlled Pilates, you are so connected to your pelvic floor and your abdomen, much more so than if you go for a run, because you're activating abdominal, like your outer abdominal, your intestinal wall, your intestinal muscles. That reinforcement, but also that awareness, is going to actually mean your bowel works more effectively. But then in everything else that you do, you're actually then going to be activating those muscles and getting far more bang for your buck. Last clarification on exercise for women, which is a very key point. Period to mid-cycle, that's your progression phase. Mid-cycle to next period, that is your consolidation phase. As soon as progesterone starts to rise, you become weaker. That rate of perceived exertion goes up. Your body is wondering if it's pregnant. It doesn't want to be pushed hard. If you struggle with things like PMS, painful periods, feeling like you're getting really bloated, it's because you're trying to live in that more consolidation phase as progression. So like I will do heavy weight training, like progressive weight training for 2 weeks, and then I will not progress for 2 weeks, and I will focus on form and consistency. And that means you go into the perfect cycle, you don't get any of those problems, but you also then don't find that you have this back and forth thing of, I was doing great last week and I've tried to do that workout today and it feels really hard and I'm really sore and now I'm tired and now I'm more hungry. And that then goes into a spiral for people. So think about your social butterfly, spring, summer. Your hormones are already rising when you've got your period, but for some people it can take a couple of days to feel like they lift back up again. So just start again with the slightly more intense stuff then. And then once you hit that mid-cycle, think, that's great, I've put the work in, I've built the house, and now I'm going to let that cement settle and firm up. Give yourself a bit of a break, and then you go back in, because like if you notice, how much better can you train when you've been on holiday and you haven't done your normal activity for a while? The body really appreciates that sense of peace.
Exactly.
And crack on again. So there's a lot of nuance, as always. I like to talk about so many different details, but hopefully that answered that question.
No, it absolutely did, because it's so true. There are all of these little connections and so many factors that influence a woman's experience doing something day to day, and it can change literally day to day as well. So it's so interesting sort of remembering all of these things to kind of be aware and have that knowledge.
Women give themselves a really hard time.
They do.
Especially with things like adjustments to hunger during their menstrual cycle. So your insulin sensitivity at the beginning of your cycle is really good. You'll actually feel naturally less hungry. As soon as your body progesterone starts to go up, you need between 200 to 300 calories more per day. You will want more carbohydrates. And again, what people will think is, I was eating really well. I was eating like lots of vegetables and protein and like a little sweet potato, and I felt full and satisfied. And then now is a bar of chocolate every night. I go, well, that's because what you need to now do is turn that tiny little sweet potato into some rice or some pasta, because your body is asking for more energy. And it would be much better for you to have like a really great like pita bowl at lunchtime, and then not have that random urge for like a huge slice of cake at 4 o'clock, which again, if you're then feeling a little bit more puffy or a little bit more water retention-y, and then you're craving those foods in a kind of slightly over the top way, and then you have them, you then look at yourself in the mirror the next day and you won't actually have changed. But your visual estimation of what you look like will have evolved because you feel like you've done something that you didn't want to do. Adjusting to those bits of body feedback, I think the problem that we often have again is this idea of we don't trust what our body is telling us, we trust what other people are doing. And the big problem is so many people take their nutrition advice, and I mean it's great for me, they take their nutrition advice off social media. But what you have to remember is, for an influencer who is just an influencer, that is their job. So if you are a 35-year-old, 40-year-old mum who has slightly broken sleep, is trying to exercise, feed everyone else, do a job, and you are trying to eat the same as somebody whose job is to turn up and create content, your nutritional needs and energy requirements are completely different. So if you have eggs, avocado and strawberries for breakfast, because that's what they're doing and they look lovely and lean, you will be starving by 11 a.m. and you'll be fighting hunger all day. Whereas if you had toast with eggs, cottage cheese and tomatoes and spinach, so the second example being carbs, protein and fibre with a bit of fat, as opposed to fat and protein with very little carbs, you will feel energetic, satisfied and not have those problems because you need that higher output of energy.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask contact details because someone needs to contact you for all of this amazing information. Your socials are obviously very active.
So my Instagram handle is Liebling Health, and then my website is lieblinghealth.com. I mean, there's social stuff and people can contact me by DM, or I mean, there's lots of different bits and all my consultation stuff and that kind of thing is on my website.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.